First of all, let me just say good morning to everyone here. And I'm glad that the house is full because I think it will be a very productive seminar. Chairman, President, greetings to you and also to the other presenters. At the outset, I'd like to make two apologies. First one is I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, not having had the time to actually create one, or perhaps the resources in terms of staff. The second apology is in respect of the overlap with the previous presenter, what I'm about to present, as well as the potential overlap with the successive presenter in this regard. In fact, in the first instance, I really thought that somehow my manuscript had gotten into Don's hands, you know. Anyway, this is no surprise because I believe eventually we all have the same objective, and the solutions for achieving that objective, a successful project, should be the same to all parties. So I will now proceed, but I have a feeling I've written too much. But I will move along as rapidly as I possibly can. Consultants undertaking the duties of contract administration must be cognizant of the need to exercise a duty of skill and care to the parties, and can be held liable if they are considered reckless, and if any of the parties to the contract suffers unreasonable harm or loss as a result of their action, their inaction, or their partiality. Effective contract administration commences very early in the typical project cycle and involves many activities not usually defined as such. In this context, we've broken this off into two main headings: pre-contract activities and contract activities. And within each of those, there are clearly identifiable subtasks and components that merit comment. So we'll start off with the pre-contract activities. Pre-contract procedures will rely on accurate representation of what is required in design, time, and cost, and on the selection of the best contract for the delivery of the product. The need to assemble a contract administration team is dependent on the scale, nature, and complexity of the project, the significance of the procurement, and the need to comply with the client organizational policy. Prior to commencement, the parties should be aware of the requirements of the execution of the works, specifications, the nature of the works, the nature of the environment, time for delivery, liquidated damages, and how payments will be made for works done. And this all relates to certainly the choice of the form of contract. The selection of the most appropriate form of contract is essential to successful project implementation and is often not given the attention it deserves, bearing in mind the significant impact it can have on contract administration. Forms of contract vary considerably, depending on the client organization, whether public or private, and on the scale, nature, and complexity of the works involved. I know I'm speaking obvious things, but they're important. In the private sector in Jamaica, the main building works contracts are the CIC forms with quantities, and the civil works contracts are FITIC-based remeasurement contracts. The public sector utilizes both these forms, as well as relatively new standard GOJ forms which are yet to be fully tested and for which no substantial case history has been developed. And there are even some government agencies that have crafted their own forms of contract. There is also an increasing use of design-build contracts, and in Jamaica this is largely unfamiliar territory, although some of you may have had pretty close experience with some of those. Many projects in Jamaica are funded through multilateral agencies such as World Bank, IDB, CDB, all which have their different, though somewhat similar forms of contract. Bilateral agreements also involve national agency, like USAID, CEDA, UK, EU, forms of contract, some of which can be extremely detailed and demanding. The variety of contracts and requirements poses professional challenges to the contract administration consultants, who should clearly have the relevant experience and expertise depending on the particular circumstances of the project. Given this cornucopia of contract forms, it is suggested that some national and perhaps international consultation between all stakeholders be organized to reduce the number and variety and to update them to respond to changing circumstances and developing technology. And that's a very big ask, but it's something that I really feel strongly ought to be done. In this regard, the identification of the contract administrator, be they architects, engineers, project managers, or otherwise, is a critical action, and their roles, responsibilities, and authority in the contract must be clearly defined. These responsibilities can be awesome, some say onerous, and this is not often recognized by the participants to the contract. It is therefore important for the client or employer to ensure that whoever is placed in this vital position possesses the required qualities to protect both his technical and contractual interests for the period of the contract. I move on to the preparation of contract and tender documentation. The efficient and successful implementation of works contracts is directly dependent on the accuracy and relevance of the working drawings, specifications, and bills of quantities prepared by the hopefully registered consultants, although this is not always a guarantee for performance. It goes without saying that well-prepared, clear, complete, and comprehensive contract documentation will minimize the need for variations and reduce the likelihood of disputes. Provisional sums ought to be kept to the absolute minimum. The contract administrator, in order to avoid later claims for extra time and cost, should verify the provision of all site and geotechnical details. How often have we seen projects halted after possession of the site because of the boundary or site conditions? The importance of preempting the contractor's site queries cannot be overemphasized. Associated with the contract tender documents are the bidding documents and the bidding procedures that are used in the selection of contractors. The tender methodology varies according to the nature and requirements of the client: private sector, public sector, multilateral, bilateral. And again, the persons responsible for preparing these must be fully cognizant of the most appropriate procedure to be used and the details involved with same. On to another heading, tender action and contract award. On the assumption that the bidding documents are well prepared and appropriate, tender action should follow in an efficient manner, and the contractor offering the best value for money selected in a fair and transparent process. For some projects, it may be necessary to have a pre-bid conference or on-site meeting with prospective bidders, and in any event, procedures should be established to enable clarification during the tender period and thereby avoid problems during construction. There are some observations I would like to make regarding the tender process, particularly with respect to the public sector procurements. The evaluation processes are often far too lengthy and sometimes burdensome, quite often due to myriads of approvals and the lack of clarity and coordination in the tender documents. And secondly, many contractors do not pay close attention to the instruction to bidders. and as a consequence prevent themselves from being selected, which in turn results in a loss of resources to all and of value for money for the public purse. Common failings include tender bonds not stamped by the tax department and a host of other, some would call them hurdles or pitfalls that some bad person may say that were created specifically to make the contractors fail. That's not quite true. I think it mostly has to do with lack of diligence by all parties. Tender action ends with the selection of the best evaluated contractor, and you'll have noticed that everything said up to now has been before the works commence, pointing out the importance of pre-contract preparation in order to avoid disputes rather than going through the costly and time-consuming process of settling them later. Contract activities. The foundation of effective contract administration lies in a working knowledge of the contract under which the works are being administered. The administrator's role is to ensure that the conditions of the contract are fulfilled in terms of its time, quality, and cost objectives. Contract signing is generally preceded by the selected contractor, providing various documents critical to the effective and efficient conduct of the contract: performance bonds, insurances, construction schedules, cash flow projections, site personnel, etc. The form of performance bond is often an issue with the bonding agencies not recognizing that bonds are for the performance of the entire contract, right up to the final certificate and not just to practical completion. Nothing is worse in contract administration than a lack of or miscommunication. Pre-commencement protocols should be established for indexing and dating all documentation and methods imposed to ensure unmistakable communications. An effective contract strategy must be established and should include, but be not limited to, the scheduling of meetings, scheduling of payments, submissions for payment, procedures for the request of changes, variations, who may issue and how, procedure for handling disputes, issuance of certifications, ensuring compliance to statutory authorities like boundaries, height, health, and safety regulations. At this time, the contractor should have examined all the contract drawings, specifications, and quantities to detect any conflicts, errors, and omissions and bring those to the attention of the contract administrator for resolution. Contract implementation in a serious way. Once construction has begun, it is important for all to understand that the contract to be implemented is not by a set of expert individuals, but by the team. The traditional mental posture of disparate team members to view all matters in terms of them and us must be rejected. The architect, engineer, contract administrator is not there to chastise the contractor or his subcontractors, but to assist and have the patience to explain any part of the contract requirements unsure to him. The contractor, on the other hand, must understand that all components of the contract, including the work of his suppliers and subcontractors, are his direct responsibility. Once the work is detailed and specified before the work starts, there can be no excuse or reason for the contractor not to proceed, as the contract quaintly calls it, regularly and diligently. In this area, practical experience is of major importance, and good communication links between construction site and project management offices or contract administration offices must be maintained. The administration management team would consist of contract administrator, be it the architect, engineer, or what have you, project consultants, again, architects, engineers, quant surveyors, technicians, clerk of works, resident engineer, or any other suitable person by agreement with the employer, depending on the nature and size of the contract. I don't think I need to go through in detail what the clerk of works or the resident engineer does, but it's important just to say that they are the ones with the eyes, ears on site who needs to record everything that happens to ensure that there is an agreed record of all events that happen on site. And this is an absolutely important requirement to ensure effective contract administration. There's the matter of holding regular site meetings and site visits by the consultants to inspect the works and check for compliance with the conditions of contract, to carry out technical meetings with the contractor, subcontractors, and others concerned, to review progress and discuss any problems which might have arisen, and, of course, to make such additional visits as might be required to deal with emergencies or unforeseen circumstances like water on site. Important thing about is reports of each site meeting. They should be submitted to keep the employer fully informed, and the contractor as well. During the course of construction, the project architect, engineer, contract administrator, assisted and supported by other project consultants, would be responsible for the following: monitoring delivery to site of materials critical to the program, maintaining communication between all parties concerned, arranging and presiding at regular site meetings to record progress and all matters pertaining to the works, reviewing and approving shop drawings, samples, and other submissions by the contractors. By the way, I'm pulling this straight out of our own practice manual in my firm. So, in collaboration with the conservator, receiving and evaluating claims and preparing interim certificates for payment by the employer, obtaining the employer's approval of issuing and approving all change or variation orders in accordance with contract conditions, ensuring the construction works, including specialist finishes, conform to acceptable industry standards and contract specifications, identifying substandard construction work and bringing it to the contractor's attention, ensuring works which fail to conform to drawings and specifications are not accepted, ensuring that required tests to relevant sections of the works and equipment are conducted in accordance with conditions, receiving and responding to, on a timely basis, all contractor queries recorded on pre-numbered requests for information, coordinating the preparation of schedules of RFIs, as they're called, and indicating their status, identifying critical information required and ensuring all verbal instructions are subsequently confirmed by written methods, receiving, evaluating, and making recommendations on behalf of the employer for all claims submitted by contractors with respect to variation orders, extensions of time, with or without loss and expense, acceleration, etc. The team leader will submit monthly and other reports to be agreed with the employer to provide information on the schedule, progress of the works, causes for the delay, measures required to recover lost time, financial reports, cash flow projections, estimated completion costs and additional costs, if any, assessment of the project status and recommendations for any action by the employer, and any other factors affecting the project. The commissioning and handover process should start some weeks before practical completion is reached. In this way, the check-in and testing required is spread over sufficient time to allow proper attention to detail. And so I won't bore you with the full details of that. Needless to say that it's a process that can take quite some considerable time. And depending on the nature of the project, we'd suggest that it starts very, very early, so that at the time for practical completion, the extent of remedial work is kept to an absolute minimum. During the defects liability period, the contractor and his contractors are required to rectify all defects listed at the time of practical completion. They're also required to make good any latent defects or faults which subsequently develop during the same period. Consultants will carry out a final inspection, issue final completion certificate after all defects have been made good. And at this time, there are other things take place: preparation of as-built drawings based on marked-up drawings from the contractor, and the preparation of final accounts by the conservators. Two areas of contract administration that are often cause for concern are the issuance of variations and the assessment of extensions of time. Variations are almost inevitable in construction contracts. They should not necessarily be seen as causes for concern, but should be effectively managed to ensure that the product delivered is what was expected by the client. It is important to understand the implication of change for both parties. Every design change has a cost effect, and major cost changes can affect the viability of the project. This is why it is important that professionals employed are competent and are aware that they can be held liable for misrepresentation if they fail to exercise a proper duty of care. Where changes are not as a result of professional error, the need to communicate with both parties to mitigate the effects will be necessary. Assessing extensions of time must be done in accordance with the terms laid out in the contract. Reasons under which extensions are given enumerated, and the administrator must ensure that due notices are received in time. The records kept by the administrator in the site diary will ensure that any assessment given can be substantiated: rain days, days on which materials were available, etc. I think I may have overrun the time, so finally, effective contract administration is successful if the following is achieved. The arrangement for delivery is satisfactory to both parties, and the expected value for money is realized by all. The client is satisfied that the product promised is being achieved at the quality specified and that the product is delivered on time. The contractor is responsive and is assured of fairness in the assessment of variations. Disputes are minimized, efficiencies are realized, and most importantly, there are no surprises. And lastly, both contractor and consultant are paid in a timely manner in accordance with their respective contract conditions. I thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. Mr. McIntyre, the consultant's view. Mr. Burrows, can you come up for me, please? Any members, anybody here from the BITU? BITU? Yes. Okay. Those are our partners in our labor agreement that we have with the workers in the construction industry. We work very well with them, and we have always been able to renew our agreement on time and without any conflict, and we continue to recognize you, and thanks for coming. I think I recognize Ms. Gordon from JNB. Welcome, ma'am. Thanks for coming. Two presentations have been made so far, and there's a theme that has come up in both, and it has to do with provisional sums. And I suspect, based on my own experience over the last maybe 5-6 years, that provisional sums are being put into the BQ to substitute for investigations that are incomplete or designs that have not been properly completed. And it would be very interesting to hear from you out there in the panel discussion questions on this particular aspect. I think it's something that we need to get into, to elaborate on, and to find out from our presenters how they feel about this, what I consider to be a vexed issue of provisional sums that are put in arbitrarily. And so we look forward to the panel discussion, which will take place right after the next speaker. I like a particular phrase that Mr. McIntyre used when he said the idea of them and us is to be rejected. And I think that's a very, very good thought to bear in mind whenever parties enter into a contract. A contract is a partnership. It is not we against them or them against us. And I think we ought to really bear that in mind as something that we take away from here. Our next presenter is Mr. Donald Moore. He's a civil engineer with over 25 years of experience in civil engineering and project management. A graduate of the UWI St. Augustine, Mr. Moore holds a master's degree in civil engineering from Clemson University, South Carolina. He's a project management professional and has served on the board of the Jamaica Dr. Bird chapter of the Project Management Institute. He's also on the council of the Jamaica Institution of Engineers. He's worked with the NWC and the UDC before joining the NHT in 1992. And he now has oversight at the NHT for planning and implementation of the NHT's construction and development portfolio. I now invite Mr. Donald Moore to bring the perspective of the client to the seminar 2015 Master Builders.